right. Good morning, Title I coordinators, and thank you for joining us for the June Title I webinar. My name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager of the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch here at KDE. Also want to say welcome to our new coordinators. I know we have several people who just joined us, so welcome. Before we get started, just make sure that those of you who are joining us on Teams have got your camera off and your mic muted up there at the top of the Teams window. That's just going to allow everybody to focus on the presentation, and we will have time for questions at the end. If you want to put those in the chat, you can do that, or you can unmute and speak. You can also send those to me via email. And we are recording this webinar. It'll be posted on our Documents and Resources webpage probably later today. So a quick recap from last month's webinar. The recording is available on our webpage, and we had some announcements and reminders, that kind of stuff, but the main thing was a really great presentation from the Pritchard Committee. They talked about parent engagement strategies and really reframing our thinking on what effective parent engagement looks like. And we also heard from some folks in Morgan County about what that looks like in their district and in their schools. And they also shared how the Title I monitoring checklists actually helped them become certified family-friendly schools with Pritchard Committee. So be sure to go back and watch that recording and pass it along to principals at your Title I schools. I do want to say that we are currently working with the Pritchard Committee to identify more potential opportunities for collaboration. Our webinar survey at the end of last month, we had some feedback about how much people liked hearing from them and wanted to hear more, so that is in the works. So today we've got announcements and reminders, information about distinguished schools, and our main focus is going to be on the consolidated monitoring season that just wrapped up. So we've got an overview of this season, some information about common district and school findings, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail to help you make sure that you are in compliance with those common items in case you're selected for monitoring this coming year. And then I'm really excited about this part. We're going to have some discussion time with Diana Hart from Lincoln County about Lincoln County's experience in consolidated monitoring. And then throughout that, I've also got some links to different KDE resources that are going to help you prepare for monitoring, make sure that you are in compliance, everything like that. Our announcements. First of all, thank you to everyone who participated in our virtual statewide federal programs training last week. We heard a lot of really great information from the Brewman Group, as always. You should have received this in an email, but in case you missed it, preliminary school year 25-26 allocations are available. They're posted on the KDE website at that link. These are for planning purposes as of right now. And I do want to remind you that these amounts are tentative. They are subject to change upon the release of the final allocations. So as you start planning and start working with your schools, be sure that when you're thinking about your core program and your must-haves, that you're keeping that hold harmless amount in the back of your mind when designing programs to be safe. Registration is open for the Continuous Improvement Summit. That's going to be September 22nd and 23rd at the Central Bank Center in Lexington. If you're not familiar with the summit, this is an annual event hosted by KDE and Cognia each year. And attendees will participate in sessions that help enhance professional learning, strengthen existing relationships, and tackle unique challenges with fresh strategies. So we have the link there to the event page. You can click on that and learn more about the event as well as register. It's always a very popular event. All right. The National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators, or NASPA, is formerly the National Title I Association. They select examples of superior federally funded school programs for national recognition through the National ESEA Distinguished Schools Program. So every year, states can identify up to 2 distinguished ESEA schools in 3 different categories. The first is exceptional student performance or academic growth for 2 or more consecutive years, closing the achievement gap between student groups, again, for 2 or more consecutive years, and excellence in serving special populations, so homeless, migrant, EL students, etc. So be sure to share this information with your schools, and any of them who are interested in applying for consideration have to submit a completed application. The link is right there. That needs to be signed by the principal and the superintendent and turned in by August 8th. So if selected as a finalist, KDE staff will conduct a site visit to interview the principal, some selected staff members, and some students before making our final decisions. And let's see, those districts that are selected will be notified in November. All right, here's another one that you should have gotten in an email from me, but just in case. Our ESEA waiver request was approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So this was a request to waive the following Title I requirements. Up first is the carryover limitation waiver. So we know that you're only supposed to carry over 15% of the previous year's funds into the next year. But you are able to request a waiver for that. ESSA says that the waiver can only be requested once every 3 years. Since COVID, there have been some different waivers from USED, allowing KDE to grant that waiver more than once every 3 years in case it's needed. So we did get that again for Project L. So the funds from this current school year that will become carryover on October 1st, if you're going to carry over more than 15% and you requested a waiver within the last 3 years, you will be able to do that again. This doesn't waive the requirement to actually request the waiver. So that information usually comes out in August, just a little bit of information that you have to provide to us to get your waiver. You still have to submit that. We can just grant it to you even if you've gotten one within the last 3 years. And the other thing that it waived, or I guess extended, was the period of availability for Project K funds. These were set to end on September 30th of this year. We got an extension. These funds will be available for obligation until June 30th of 2026. And if you want to see the full announcement about that and the other programs that benefit from this, it's in the Commissioner's Weekly Message from June 17th, which is linked there. All right, speaking of obligating funds, we, again, want to make sure that we're always working towards not having more than 15% carryover, even though we know the waiver opportunity is out there. So keeping track of Project L funds, at this point, you should be at about 68% obligated. Remember, these percentages aren't required by ESSA. This is just me averaging out that 85% over the first 15 months of the grant. So if you're a little below or a little above this, don't worry. If you're significantly below this in terms of what you've obligated, make sure that you meet with your finance officer and see if you're going to be on track to meet the carryover limitation. Maybe you're going to need to request a waiver. Maybe you need to go in and make some adjustments to some of your plans. Just you want to make sure that you are kind of staying on top of that. And our open project quick reference table has a couple updates to it. Of course, for Project J, I've kind of bolded that all of those funds should be spent or encumbered by June 30th, which is Monday. So make sure that all those funds have been spent or encumbered by Monday. And then the final federal cash request submission is due August 30th. And you can also see where I've updated Project K to reflect those dates that I just shared. We don't have the exact date for the final federal cash request submission. I would anticipate it being kind of similar to the year before that, sometime in August, but we'll get that updated as soon as the information is available. And our June Title I newsletter had some great information. Some of it is all those announcements and reminders I just shared with you. We had an article that tied back to an ESEA Now article about the importance of flexibility during budget uncertainty. We also had an article about intentional spending according to documented need. Very important. You want to make sure that you're putting thought into how these funds are being spent. An article about skipping the swag, t-shirts and magnets and all of those kind of things that are very fun but should not be purchased with Title I funds. So be sure you check that out. And our Principal's Perspective article was all about planning the Title I annual meeting. In terms of things that you should kind of have on your radar right now, of course, meeting with the finance officer and other finance staff to reconcile any budget issues, check that carryover, spend down, timely spending, just making sure you're on track for carryover limitation, make sure that funds are being spent in line with the approved application, etc. You also need to review time and effort documentation for your staff who are paid partially with Title I funds. So as those staff complete their time and effort documentation every month, they're just documenting exactly what they worked. Then at this point, you go back and you calculate what percentage of their time was spent on Title I versus whatever other things they're paid from. And you want to check and make sure that that percentage aligns with the FTE that you put in GMAP. If it doesn't, you're going to need to go in and make some updates to GMAP. You may also need to update the actual budget in Enterprise ERP to make sure that the Title I funds are only paying for the portion of work that that person did for Title I. It's never too early to think about comparability. So kind of start thinking about the people who are going to need to be documented on the comparability report this fall. Of course, you are gathering your data on private school services that occurred this year, evaluating their effectiveness, thinking about plans for the upcoming school year if the schools are participating, and doing your consultation with them. Same thing for your public schools, reviewing program implementation and effectiveness and planning for the next year. And finally, looking at some of those parent documents that might need to be reviewed or revised, so policies and compacts. Take a look at your data, any feedback that you got. There may need to be some adjustments there, and of course, work jointly with parents to make those adjustments. All right, on to the main topic today. We wrapped up the on-site visit portion of our consolidated monitoring season in April, and thank you to the many district and school level staff who helped gather documentation and participated in interviews. We know that taking part in the consolidated monitoring process is a very big undertaking, but everybody did a really great job this year, and we were able to see and hear about some really innovative practices occurring across the state, which is always really fun for us. So we had 21 districts overall who had some sort of Title I monitoring for school year 24-25. We had 11 districts who had some desk monitoring in the fall. And then for our consolidated monitoring, we had 10 districts that were visited. So each of those sites that was visited receives an actions needed form. Now, since desk monitoring focuses only on district level requirements, only the district got an actions needed form. Consolidated monitoring, we have district and school level requirements. So each one of those sites gets their own form. And this form outlines strengths that can be celebrated, as well as maybe some recommendations that KDE feels would really help the school or the district improve current practices. And the form may include some actions needed, some findings. And findings are areas of non-compliance identified by KDE, and these have to be addressed by the district or school. So as a reminder, Uniform Grant Guidance requires KDE to monitor subrecipients for program compliance. Findings are not uncommon, I definitely want to say that. And the actions needed form is kind of structured in a way that helps you really connect between the findings and the required action, very detailed in spelling out exactly what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by. It also includes some helpful resources that will help you demonstrate compliance and take care of those findings. Sorry, excuse me, I need a drink. All right, in addition to reviewing feedback to inform future monitoring seasons, we also track the different findings that we issue, and we note which ones were most common. So this helps us determine what additional clarification or support may be needed. And these are some of the most common district level findings we've seen. So I've broken these down according to the checklist section, and I've also added some references to the different indicator numbers and some links to some of our KDE resources that will help you demonstrate compliance. So if you don't have one or more of these items in place, go ahead and start working on that now. And if you need help, ask your Title I consultant. Up first is the foster care transportation agreement. This has been one of our top findings for several years. And a couple of reminders. This is more than a blanket policy about foster children or a blanket policy about transportation. This is an agreement that outlines step-by-step procedures that are taken when a student is placed in foster care, or maybe they have a change in their placement, and that puts them in a different attendance area than their school of origin. So the document's that's linked here is going to walk you through how to set up that best interest determination meeting, factors that need to be considered regarding transportation, and the dispute resolution process. As it says on the slide, this is developed jointly with the Child Welfare Agency, so you want to make sure there is documentation of that as well. So correspondence, meeting minutes, etc. And like I said, that guidance document is going to walk you through exactly what needs to be in each section. For our homeless children and youth, these are actually two different indicators, but I've put them together. A lot of districts like to combine these into a single item. So we have written procedures for awarding credit and awarding diplomas. Seen these quite a bit over the last few years. And again, these are going to be more than a blanket policy stating that the district will do something. These are outlining those steps. It's going to vary from district to district because each district is different. So some things we're looking for: the tool or methodology used to calculate credit, how credit's consolidated, access to summer programs and extracurricular programs. And we've got a KDE resource there that will help you ensure you've got the right information included. We know this one, we've talked about it a lot, parent and family engagement policy. And the issue that we typically identify here is that the policy doesn't describe how the district will meet requirements. So go ahead and take a look at your policy. If it just says the district will, and then it lists those ESSA requirements, that means it's not compliant and it would result in a finding. So another thing that we find is that it's possible you're already doing most, if not all, of the things that are listed in there. They just need to be documented in the policy. So we've got several resources. We've got our policy checklist that has those requirements. We have a district policy template, which you are not required to use, but you can. Really helps walk you through and make sure every item has been included. And then just a general FAQ document about policies and compacts. And then finally, fiscal management. The thing we saw most common this year was about timely spending for some specific funds. So our homeless set aside, our funds for private school services, parent and family engagement set aside. So the majority of funds reserved for these purposes are intended to be spent during the year in which they were generated. But we often see minimal spending in these areas when we monitor. And I know the instinct is to kind of want to hold on to them just in case. We can't do that with this money. So as you're planning for school year 25-26, make sure that you are being intentional in that planning. Conduct needs assessments, review how funds were spent, or maybe how they weren't spent this year, and make adjustments. Don't just keep doing the same thing, especially if you're not actually spending the funds that way. I've linked our carryover information document on this slide. It does largely focus on the 15% carryover provision in Title I, but it has some additional details about these specific pots of money as well. Then we've got our most common school findings. Up first is the annual meeting. Title I program information, such as the fact that the school is participating in Title I, and parents' right to participate in these activities. This needs to be presented to parents annually in a meeting format. So although including some Title I info in a handbook, or maybe you've created a handout, posted it on a web page, those are all great ways to make sure that the information is available at all times to parents. Those alone don't constitute a meeting. We do recommend combining this with an open house or back to school bash, something that's highly attended, to maximize the parents that receive this information. Make sure that schools are saving documentation of how parents were notified. So for example, if we just have an agenda or maybe a flyer advertising open house and all it says is Title I, that doesn't tell us what information was shared. There's no way for us to make sure that parents got the information they were supposed to get. So we do have tips on the information to include during the meeting in our Title I handbook, and as I mentioned earlier, in our June newsletter. Same as on the district slide, parent and family engagement policy. Again, what we often see missing is that how portion. So make sure that when you look at the school policy, you see some school-specific information about how they're meeting those requirements. Another thing we sometimes see is activities described in the policy must be taking place. So it's typically not that there's no activities taking place. There's parent and family engagement events. They're just not referenced at all in the policy. So make sure that some of those items are mentioned there. You don't have to list every single thing that the school is doing. Give some general ideas of the types of things that they are doing. Again, we've got a school policy checklist as well as 2 different templates, one for elementary and one for secondary schools, because there's one little difference at the elementary school, which is this next common finding. Discussion of the compact as it relates to individual student achievement during a parent conference. So this is only required at the elementary level, and we've talked about this several times before. This conversation needs to be tailored to the individual student rather than just a general overview of the compact. So what we're talking about is in the conference saying, you know, here's how your student is doing, here's the compact, here's what we each agreed to would be our responsibilities. Are we all doing these things as effectively as we can? Sometimes this can be hard to document, so we do have a resource available in our sample documents folder that will help schools document this. All right, this is the part I was really excited about. Another piece of feedback that we got was hearing more from districts about what they're doing. So we are going to welcome Diana Hart, who is Assistant Superintendent in Lincoln County. Lincoln County was one of the 10 districts selected for consolidated monitoring this year. So she's going to share a little bit about her experience. So first of all, just kind of tell us, how long have you been working with Title I?
Hi, this is actually my first full school year working with Title I.
Yeah, so she was selected for monitoring without even having a full year under her belt, which does happen sometimes. So probably related to that, tell us what went through your mind when you found out that Lincoln County was going to be monitored.
So last year I was hired in late August and took over Title I. So things were kind of already in place, and I was just trying to learn as much as I could. The person that was over our title programs retired. And so I was just trying to figure out why we had our application set up the way we did and just what were the requirements, and are we following all the requirements, and are we utilizing our funds in the best way? So really, I just spent my first year just trying to learn. So I did panic a little bit when I found out I was selected for monitoring, just because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Exactly.
But it ended up being a huge blessing because I learned so much through the process and really tightened up our systems and processes in our district. And our principals actually learned a lot along the way as well. So it was actually ended up being a great experience.
All right, that's what we love to hear. So kind of talk us through how you prepared for monitoring. Like, how did you get organized? It's a lot of requirements, a lot of documentation.
So I started just going through the monitoring checklist. I became a part of Title I Next when it was offered, as soon as it was offered, even as a pilot, just because I liked that there were due dates, and it kind of helped principals stay organized as well because they could see when things were due, you don't have to, I guess, necessarily have it by that specific date that's on Title I Next, but it helped me organize our documentation. But I really liked looking back, at what were you guys going to be looking for in specifics on that? So there were some outdated district policies that I needed to update at the beginning of the year. I actually had noticed the foster care transportation last year and had worked because I was previously worked as a DPP. So I was very familiar with our DCBS office. So I set up a meeting immediately just to get that in place. And then I really use Christina Benassi. She's my KDE rep. So I probably owe her a gift card or something because I wear her out with questions or have her look over things all the time just to make sure I'm on the right track. And she's very, very helpful. I also am part of a cadre, a Title I cadre through our co-op. And that's very helpful because I get to ask lots of questions to people that have been doing it for many years and have lots of experience. Um, I have a good friend in Gary County, or in the next county over, that has been working with Title I, Mr. Caleb Gresham, or I guess I should say Dr. Caleb Gresham, that has worked with it for several years. So he was very helpful to me when, I wasn't sure how something worked or why we may have done something one way. And, I'm just looking at things. He was very helpful in answering questions or giving me guidance. And I think he learned a little bit along the way with all my questions.
Absolutely. And I will say that for everybody else, the Lincoln County visit was our very last visit. So it was at the end of April. But, we started hearing questions and asking for clarification from Diana well before April. And I know that sometimes people are afraid to ask a question for KDE. There's the idea that, oh, if you ask a question, they're, writing you down and they're going to come monitor you. That is not how it works. We're here to answer your questions. So please ask us questions. Ask us to look something over or help you with something. That's why we're here. We don't have the time to write down everybody who asks a question. That would be quite an undertaking for us. So how did you involve your principals in this process and really keep them informed of, what documentation was needed, what they needed to expect, things like that?
So we have monthly principals meetings. And so I literally added a section to every single meeting where we just talked about Title I. And so I would remind them of things that they needed to turn in, or if I noticed that a school didn't have something, then I would contact them and say, hey, have you set up your parent teacher conferences so you can discuss the compact agreement? Just reminders. I visited every single site base after we discussed it in a principal meeting. They said, well, why don't you visit each of our site bases and talk to our council about the compact agreement and about our parent family engagement policy? Just share what you shared with us in this principal meeting. So I did that, and I think that's something we will continue doing each year. I try to go to events as much as possible if they're having an event where parents are coming in just to see, how things are going or answer questions. And I usually set up a little table about Title I, as silly as that sounds, at those events, just so I can get people to fill out feedback surveys. Previously on our surveys, we may have had really and truly, I'm embarrassed to say, but sometimes single digit of responses on those surveys, even though they were posted on our website. So I'm happy to report that we had a huge turnout on our survey results this year. So it was, in my opinion, it was finally usable information for us. It was good feedback that I could use in our discussions. And then even though we had talked about Title I monthly before the visit, I actually visited each principal and just went over everything again, and made sure they didn't have any questions, and that made sure that we were on the same page and that we felt good about the documentation we sent in, made sure that there was nothing missing that we needed to add to our documentation before you guys arrived. So I think that just kind of gave them a peace of mind right before the visit, when they were going to be questioned by KDE.
All right. Sorry, my Wi-Fi stopped in the middle of that. So I'm having a great time over here today. I'll also say that one new thing we introduced this year was a webinar, just a little like 15-minute webinar recording for principals that we shared out with them just to kind of help ease their minds about it. So that's something that we're definitely going to continue. So you've talked about this a little bit. Were there any KDE resources that helped you kind of figure out, okay, what documentation do I need to save? What do I not need to save? How should I prepare for these interviews? Things like that.
Yeah, just really referencing that checklist, looking at examples. I went back to webinars. I would look for specific topics and go rewatch a webinar. And just, I mean, your site has a wealth of information and you can pretty much find anything. If I couldn't, of course, I reached out to you, Erin, with questions as well. And so really and truly, the KDE website has everything that you could possibly need with examples and recommendations, the handbook. It's just a wealth of information.
That's what we're going for. And this is one of the reasons that we keep our monitoring checklist posted on our webpage year round, is so that districts and schools can always refer to these and see what exactly am I supposed to be doing, saving, etc. And I'll also kind of highlight that, we just talked about some of those common district and school findings. Now, Lincoln County did get findings. Pretty much everybody gets findings. Title I is a huge program with lots of requirements, and there's, always room for improvement. But they did not get some of those most common findings because they were using these resources, working ahead, making sure that, they had all their ducks in a row, essentially asking questions when needed. So how's the monitoring experience going to impact your program moving forward?
Well, I think, hopefully I'll be in this position for quite some time, but if I ever had to step away, I really feel like there are good, solid systems and processes. We have a handbook now that you follow for all of our processes here. So it really helped us just get organized and have good documentation so that everyone knows how the process works. Everyone knows what documentation to collect each year and how to collect it, how we're going to get out information to parents. So we just have really good systems in place now, I feel like. So that was the biggest takeaway for me, that it really helped us get organized.
Yeah, and those are so important. If I had a nickel for every time we heard from a new coordinator who said, I just, took on Title I, or I've inherited it and I have no idea what I'm doing. There's nothing for me to look at. Somebody's retired and, all the information was siloed with them. So it's really important to write these things down and just have some sort of reference in case you win the lottery and you leave. And then finally, what advice do you have for anybody out there who hasn't gone through the monitoring process?
I would say don't be scared. It really helps you learn a lot and get things organized. And there's nobody on that team that I felt like was out to get us, or, there's always, anytime you have an audit, there's going to be findings because it's just big, like you said. And that's okay, because it helps you clean up those last few things that maybe you overlooked or that someone missed. So I really think it's a good experience if you're a new coordinator. It's really, really helpful, just because you have a team of people that they're coming to visit you. So it just helped me know that it's okay to reach out and ask questions. But yeah, it's actually not as scary of an experience as I thought it was going to be. And really and truly, the bulk of the work is done before the visit. So just setting aside time each week to work on that and just to look at policies and procedures and develop your processes. And then when the visit comes, it's just showing off what you've created or what you've put in place. That's really how it ends up going.
Exactly. And we do hear that from districts pretty regularly after we monitor, of like, that was beneficial. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. And so definitely for everybody out there, like, start looking at those checklists now and getting things organized. So in the event you are selected, you've already got them. It's maybe just dragging and dropping them, into SharePoint or something, and preparing for the interviews. It doesn't have to be this, mad dash rush there at the end. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Diana, and sharing about your monitoring experience.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so that's going to wrap up our webinar today, but let's check for any questions before we log off. Let's see. If I can find my chat button. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat. Let me check my email. I don't see anything yet. Are the checklists on the website? Yes. So on our Title I Part A Documents and Resources webpage, there is a little section for monitoring. You'll see our desk monitoring checklist, as well as checklists for district consolidated and school-wide program and targeted assistance school checklist. So make sure that you're looking at the right one there, and I've just put the link in the chat. All right, our next webinar, where I promise to be less caffeinated, is going to be Thursday, July 31st at 10 a.m. Eastern, as always. We've got a link to our webinar feedback survey on there, and I always like to remind you that we want to hear what you find helpful and useful, what you'd like to see more of. So you can send that to me, you can send it to your assigned consultant, or if you'd prefer, you can use our anonymous feedback survey and share that there. All right, I still do not see any questions, so thank you all for joining us, and everybody have a nice day. Try to stay cool.